Welcome to City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. The state legislature begins its so-called short session of 60 days this month, but you can expect some long debates over some controversial spending policies. Governor Bob Ferguson says he's trying to bridge a $2.3 billion gap between state revenue and spending through mid-2027.
In this proposed supplemental budget, I'm providing a roadmap to the legislature.
The plan cuts spending, pulls $1 billion from the Rainy Day Fund, and, for the first time, diverts money from the state's carbon auctions under the Climate Commitment Act to fill the deficit. Plus,
I support a millionaires tax.
The governor wants to tax people who make more than $1 million a year, which could bring in $3 billion annually. But that money wouldn't come in until 2029.
It's time to get spending under control.
The Republican minority in Olympia is blasting Ferguson's proposal for not solving the state's budget problem, while some Democrats want to rebalance our economy with a new payroll tax on the state's wealthiest companies.
There may be no kings in Washington state, but we most certainly do have elites.
What's next with the state's spending plan and the possible impact of federal funding cuts?
What do we need to do to protect Washingtonians from an out-of-control, corrupt federal government?
Seattle area lawmakers are weighing in on this and more.
What the communities need right now is to be able to keep their health care.
We are a complete outlier in not having an income tax.
It's a preview of the 2026 state legislative session, next on City Inside Out. And here we are with a number of our Seattle area state lawmakers to break down what's happening with our upcoming legislative session. Senator Jamie Pedersen is the Senate Majority Leader from the 43rd District, from downtown up to the UW. Senator, great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Also with us is House Majority Leader Representative Joe Fitzgibbon from the 34th District, from West Seattle out to Vashon Island. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Brian.
And also with us, we have Senator Rebecca Saldaña, Chair of the Labor and Commerce Committee, also from the 37th District, that's Central Seattle down to Renton. So glad you could make it.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's get going here. Senator Pedersen, I know you've been working on this high earners tax and millionaires tax that's gotten a lot of headlines. I want to put that on the side burner for a second here. Let's talk about the here and now when it comes to this supplemental budget. The governor's plan to fill what he's calling a $2.3 billion deficit. To fill that, he's talking about $800 million in spending cuts, taking $1 billion from the state's Rainy Day Fund, and then something unprecedented here, talking about $600 million taken from the state's sale of air pollution allowances. Where do you want to start with this? What do you think of this plan?
Well, I guess what I would say is we left in April with a balanced budget, and that has really been thrown out of balance by the malevolent actions of the federal government. Included in the spending that the governor is required to do is a giant tens of millions of dollars of investment in information technology to try to be able to verify whether people are working so that they can get Medicaid and other benefits, right? That's required by the passage of H.R. 1. So, part of the reason for the spending that we have to do is things that we don't want to do, and that, frankly, we think are wrong and immoral. We also have significant problems created by the tariffs. And as the most trade-dependent state in the country, a significant effect that's flowing from that reckless economic policy. And then we have a whole series of cuts coming to us, to our research institutions, to Medicaid and other health care spending, to food benefits, all sorts of things that people want to try to backfill from the federal government. So,
other than that, pretty smooth session ahead.
It's really easy, right? So there are a lot of challenges, and then part of the problem is that because we're in the second year of a biennium, we don't have a lot of time either for cuts to take effect or for new revenue to make a difference.
Yeah.
So I think largely to patch up the mess that the federal government has created is just going to require some cuts and some moving things around. I don't mean to make that sound less painful than it probably will be, because we made a lot of cuts last session. But you know, I think the governor's budget is a reasonable starting point. I am certain that there will be pieces of it that the legislature ends up agreeing with, and I think that it is also a certainty that we will not do exactly what he proposed.
Fair. Representative Fitzgibbon, I wanted to talk with you specifically about this plan to deal with the air pollution allowances and put these dollars elsewhere. You were a leading voice in bringing the state's Climate Commitment Act to life 5 years ago. What do you think about taking $600 million of revenue away from our state's environmental needs and putting that towards a deficit here?
Yeah, I think a few things. One, the governor, this is the first budget he's had to draft, and he had no easy choices in putting together this budget for all the reasons that Senator Pedersen outlined, and more. This is a very challenging budget environment, and he had to make difficult choices in order to propose a balanced budget to the legislature, including transferring $600 million from the Climate Commitment Act auctions to pay for the Working Families Tax Credit, which is a program that we created 5 years ago to support the lowest income people in the state, which has been paid for out of the state general fund since it was created, and he's proposing paying for that instead out of the Climate Commitment Act. That's not an easy choice. I think that when we look at the impacts of extreme weather events on our state, particularly the most recent impacts of the atmospheric river and the flooding, but also the recurring droughts and wildfires that we've seen for the last many years as a result of more frequent and severe extreme weather events. We're already experiencing the harms of climate change. We also have the federal government really trying to take us the wrong direction and forcing us to pollute more in ways that our state doesn't want to do.
Coal, et cetera.
With coal, with rolling back vehicle emission standards. So I think this is a really important time for us to try to maintain and accelerate our work as a state to move towards a clean energy future. So I hope that we're able to find other pathways to balance the budget, and that we're able to restore as much of that money as possible towards driving energy efficiency, driving clean energy, to really save Washingtonians money, because energy bills are a part of the impacts to cost of living that Washingtonians are experiencing. And I think anything that we can do to help Washingtonians feel less pain from the cost of fossil fuels, the cost of filling up with a tank of gas, or paying an electricity bill that's inflated because the federal government's forcing us to use dirty, expensive power, is a smart long-term investment. So I hope that we're able to move as many of those dollars back towards decarbonization as possible.
Thank you. Senator Saldaña, let me get some thoughts from you here. I know you've been raising some concerns about federal cuts to health care and social services, as your colleagues have here, how that could affect our state. The governor's talking about putting $165 million towards food assistance and Medicaid programs in his proposal. Does that answer the concerns you have? Is that enough? Does more need to be put there? I'm thinking about some of the impacts of flooding, et cetera, too. Some thoughts about this.
Yeah, and I know that it is a short session, and whether there's the votes or not yet for considering ways that we actually look at revenue to address the cuts, because as my colleagues have said, these cuts are coming as a tax to the people of Washington from the federal government and H.R. 1. But what the communities need right now is to be able to keep their health care. They need to be able to feed their families and be able to feel safe in our communities. And, cuts are really, really painful and are impacting communities that least can afford it. And so that is why I have partnered with Representative Sean Scott to introduce legislation that is called Well Washington, and would take the Jumpstart idea and bring it to the state level, and just have the most well-off corporations be able to pay into that safety net so that we have resiliency. So that's what I'm proposing.
Let me jump into that a little bit further, and I want to make sure I point out to people these different revenue ideas that we're talking about here. That revenue would not be coming in for this session. This is down the line here, years down the line, as a matter of fact. But let's talk about this idea that businesses making more than $7 million a year, as I understand it, would be paying into this. It's similar to what the city of Seattle has going on with this Jumpstart payroll tax that you mentioned. Your plan would exempt Seattle companies that are already paying this. But can you tell us why you're working on this, that bigger picture here, and how it would impact our economy? There are some people who would say you're going to push big businesses out of the state. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think part of it is that, these big businesses that are doing so well in our state did it because we had a strong safety net. We were investing in early education. We were investing in our roads and highways and our bridges. We are supportive of and have a good environment for businesses to thrive and to attract the best talent in the world here locally. And so I think part of it is that we're not keeping up with what it costs for safety nets. And so being able to work with business and labor and community to adjust it. But the idea is that they're already paying it. We're not seeing that businesses are leaving. We've seen that revenue grow in Seattle when we needed it most. And being able to look at this as well as other proposals for revenue, because we have an upside-down tax system, that over the last 8 years, we have, since our party has been in control of the Senate, we have been taking attempts to try to right-size that.
Okay.
This proposal, along with others, would further allow us to be able to right-size our tax so that those that have the hardest time to pay will be able to get some relief. Affordability is a real issue for the people of Washington right now.
Thank you. Representative Fitzgibbon, I was listening into the Rewire Policy Conference last month. It's also a legislative preview session of sorts. You brought up the idea that maybe it's time to consider a statewide income tax again. As you put it, a very politically hot topic, has been for a long time. Voters rejected this idea the last time in 2010, the year you came into office, as it turns out. Is a state income tax, do you want to bring that up this session, or where are we going with that thought, do you think?
I think that Washington deserves that conversation. I think it's a hard conversation because we have this long history of not having an income tax in the state, dating back to 1933 when a 5-4 decision by the state Supreme Court declared that income is property, which almost no other state adheres to that precedent. Because of that decision, we have had a tax code that relies very heavily on other tools which are not keeping pace with the needs of our state. Sales tax, property tax, business and occupation tax. 41 other states have a personal income tax. I think it's worth us asking whether we could do a better job for the people of our state with education, with healthcare, with the safety net, as well as could we reduce some of the taxes that really weigh heavily on Washingtonians if we had a more balanced tax code that asked the people who are doing extremely well in today's economy to support our shared needs.
Do you think it would change our state's economy in such a way that, again, people would not want to move to this state, would not want to live here, would not want to start businesses here? I've heard that argument before, too.
I think if we do a good job, it will support our state's economy. I think it will enable us to rely less heavily on things like the business and occupation tax, which we do hear from businesses, big businesses and small businesses, is an impediment to their ability to invest in Washington to grow jobs here. I think a more balanced tax code that relies on more legs of the stool means that we rely less heavily on things like sales and the B&O tax, and I think that's good for Washington's economy. And I've had that conversation with business leaders who don't necessarily want to see higher taxes in Washington, but do generally agree that a more balanced tax code, like most states have, would put us in a more competitive position relative to the other states.
Got it. Senator Pedersen, I want to talk about this high earners tax you've been working on here. The governor supports this idea, a 9.9% tax on those making over $1 million a year. Again, this plan would not bring in money. 2026, the earliest that could happen would be 2029, so it's not for this year's budget. Can you explain why you're pushing for this and how you'd make it happen, especially since the legislature passed a statewide ban on income taxes less than 2 years ago? Does that conflict with this? Yeah,
so if we do proceed with the millionaire tax idea, then that'll be an amendment to the prohibition on an income tax that we passed as part of the initiative to the legislature in 2024. Just to be clear, probably 95% of the bills that we pass are changes to bills that we passed before, right? And no legislature can bind any future legislature. So that's not a particularly surprising thing that you would say, well, with this exception, that's how it would be. I agree with what Representative Fitzgibbon said about the importance of changing our tax code so that it's more balanced and more sustainable for the state. I think an important component of the bill, if it proceeds, will be to figure out what other more regressive taxes we can use some of the proceeds to lower.
Sales tax, for example?
It could be sales tax, it could be property tax, it could be gas tax, it could be the business and occupations tax. What I think is interesting, we had a presentation from our caucus staff before our retreat here a couple months ago about the ways in which our tax code is out of line with other states. Our sales tax is actually sort of in the middle of the pack as far as
even as high as it is.
Even as high as it is, it's sort of in the middle of the pack. Our business taxes are high relative to other states, particularly when you take into account the payroll taxes that businesses pay.
Okay.
We're an outlier in having a state property tax, which is one of the main ways that we fund public schools. We are a complete outlier in not having an income tax of any sort. So,
One of 9 states, is it, or 8?
One of 9 that doesn't have a personal income tax, yeah. And, just to put this in perspective, the tax in excess of $1 million, on income in excess of $1 million, would affect about 20,000 households.
Yeah.
So if we can turn that around and create a tax cut for 4 million households, that's paid for by 20,000 of our neighbors who are doing the best.
0.5% of our state's population, right?
Exactly, contributing some extra revenue, then that seems like it could be a good workable move.
Okay, I'm going to get some feedback from your colleagues here if I could, because I think one of the criticisms is, all right, it's millionaires today, but it's going to be everybody tomorrow paying income tax. And I know this is one of the different criticisms here. Do you have a response to that, Senator Saldaña, when considering this idea of some sort of income tax?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that I think the bill is what it is, so I'll just take it as its on its face. And I think what we're looking at is how do we bring progressivity or fairness into our tax system with that balanced approach. So I mean, I do think what I've been doing, and I think our caucuses have been doing, is really looking, like, we have 3 budgets at the state level, but for a regular Washingtonian, they don't know the difference,
right,
whether it's a transportation or capital or operating. And so for us, we've been really working to look at our state budget as one budget that has these 3 components. And so when we're looking at tax burden or benefits or who's paying and who's getting the services, we're looking more holistically. And so when we look at that approach, I think this is a way that we're having those that are wealthiest among us be able to pay into our system. There's many ways that lower income or middle income folks are already paying into it.
Okay.
And so I don't see us moving to a place where we would do a straight across income tax on all of that revenue. Yeah. I do think as we're looking at the balance that there could be an idea that we'd replace some other things with a progressive income tax, with those that are the least able to pay, paying a smaller portion or not paying at all, and then those at the higher end paying more.
Yeah. Representative Fitzgibbon, some ideas about this slippery slope argument that if you start with a tax on millionaires, it's going to end up sliding towards everyone else.
Yeah, I think a few things. One, I don't hear a lot of support for taxing, low-income or middle-income people's income.
The voters have spoken a few times.
Yeah, and the legislature understands that too. I don't hear from my colleagues, I think we should have an income tax on people making $70,000 a year. I just don't think that there's support for that at any level. The other thing is, even under the current outdated Supreme Court precedent from 1933, we could already enact an income tax at a flat level. We could enact a 1% income tax on all Washingtonians' income, and there's no support to do that. So even absent that outdated Supreme Court ruling, which is something that I think that this idea of a millionaire's tax would help us maybe revisit with the Supreme Court, that doesn't prohibit us from enacting an income tax that applies to all Washingtonians. And you just don't see proposals to do that because nobody wants to do that. Nobody thinks that's the thing, that's the tool that gets us to a more sustainable, more balanced tax code. Okay.
Some final thoughts about this millionaire's tax, where you want to guide the discussion, I guess, during the session here, and this whole concept of a slippery slope, and this is something that everyone would eventually pay down the line.
Yeah, so, we talked earlier about the way in which the legislature can change anything that happened before. So that is true, that a future legislature could come back. That would be a discussion for that time, right? And so, for example, if there were a proposal 5 years from now to lower the threshold to $500,000, and then in return for that, abolish the state property tax. I think that might be an interesting thing to consider. The biggest point from my perspective is it's crazy that our Supreme Court 90 years ago constitutionalized this and made it impossible for the elected representatives of the people to be able to have this discussion, right? So we haven't been able to put those kinds of trade-offs in front of the voters and say, hey, we think this would be a good change for you, right? So, that Representative Fitzgibbon is exactly right that ultimately it is the fact that we live in a democracy, right? That's the big constraint on this. We're not going to be taxing people making $50,000 a year.
Okay, thank you for that. Representative Fitzgibbon, I wanted to switch gears and talk about some issues that might not be on everyone's radar when it comes to priorities for the upcoming session here. You're working on a bill that has bipartisan support to potentially increase the use of nuclear energy in our state. Why are you pushing for this? Talk to us about safety concerns, et cetera. What do you got?
Sure. So Representative Stephanie Barnard, who's a representative from the Tri-Cities area, which is sort of the hub of nuclear science and energy in our state, proposed a bill that I co-sponsored that would direct the State Department of Commerce to incorporate nuclear energy into the state's energy strategy. I think it's valid for us to evaluate what role nuclear can play in securing baseload power, dispatchable electricity as we transition away from coal and natural gas. We know we're going to need more power for things like home heating and for electric vehicle charging in the years to come. And we also know that energy is a, constraint on family budgets, and I think we need to look at all options that avoid greenhouse gas emissions, and nuclear I think is worth looking at. I think it remains to be seen whether that can be done in a cost-effective way. There's lots of innovative ideas for how to use both nuclear fusion, nuclear fission in safer ways than were in place in previous generations. So whether it actually, we do have some nuclear power in our energy mix today from the Columbia Generating Station in Richland. I think it's an open question whether or not new nuclear can help us meet the needs of the future, but I think looking at it in the context of its costs, its safety, alongside wind, solar, storage, geothermal, all the other options that we need to develop in order to transition rapidly away from coal and natural gas power is worth exploring.
Thank you for that. Senator Saldaña, I want to make sure we talk about the measures you're considering this session to protect immigrant workers in our state. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I'm partnering with Representative Lillian Ortiz-Self and the Attorney General Nick Brown on Immigrant Worker Protection Act. This piece of legislation would help provide clarity and some protections to our workforce here in Washington. So if an employer gets an I-9 audit, which requires reviewing people's work permits and documentation, that this would require them to make sure that the workforce also has that information so that they can prepare as well. It also then provides clarity for employers about what their rights and responsibilities are in the face of an I-9 audit, and looking to have that piece of legislation move forward. There's another piece of legislation that Senator Valdez and Representative Cortez are working on around making sure that people have clarity about if law enforcement are coming to pick people up, they need to actually identify themselves.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Senator Pedersen, I saved a special one for you. The group Let's Go Washington has filed a lawsuit against the legislature's rewrite of the state's parental rights law from last year, known as House Bill 1296. They're also planning to submit an initiative to the legislature this year to overturn this bill. What's your approach to taking up this debate again?
I think it is unlikely that we will take up the debate again. If the initiative qualified, then I think it's likely that it will be in front of the voters, and they'll get to make a decision about whether, for example, they want to abolish the right of parents to choose whether to send their kids to charter schools, which is one of the things that the legislature included in the rewritten Parents' Bill of Rights.
Okay, thank you for the preview there. It is time to finish up. Senator Saldaña, your expectations for the 2026 short session. What are you hoping to achieve in 60 days?
Quite a bit. As the chair of Labor and Commerce, I mean, one of our biggest goals is to continue to protect workers in the face of federal attacks. That's both our immigrant workers, our agricultural workers, and so we're looking at how we strengthen our own our safety nets, and making sure that we are, helping as much as possible to defray the impacts of the federal cuts.
Thank you. Representative Fitzgibbon, your hopes for the 2026 session.
Yeah, Brian, so much of our work in the 2026 session is about responding to and protecting Washingtonians from things that Congress and the president are doing to us, whether that's the budget hole that they've created by imposing huge amounts of red tape on Medicaid and food assistance, or withdrawing federal support for those programs, or attacking our climate and energy laws, attacking immigrant families in Washington. So I think everything that we do this session is really guided by, what do we need to do to protect Washingtonians from an out-of-control, corrupt federal government.
Wow. Some thoughts here. Can you Trump-proof the Washington state government here in the 2026 session? I'll let you wrap up.
We're not going to be able to protect everybody in the state from all of the harmful actions that are coming toward us from Washington, D.C., but that is really our highest priority, to try to make sure that we maintain our state's protections for immigrants, for the people who live here, whether they're researchers at the University of Washington and Fred Hutch, or transgender kids. All of those people are disfavored, along with our farmers who are suffering from tariffs, right? So we'll do our best, and eventually it will pass.
Okay, thank you for this, and we will be right back.
What are people saying on social media about the state legislative session ahead? One person writes, "We have a good economy. We should be adding to the rainy day fund, not raiding it. No matter how much money from taxes, the Democrats always overspend and have nothing to show for it." Another person comments, "Supporting a slightly less regressive tax system is not class warfare. It's well within the bounds of mainstream pragmatic American political debate and has been for over 100 years. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media.
Great to have that input, and a big thanks to Senator Saldaña, Representative Fitzgibbon, and Senator Pedersen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Brian Callanan. We'll see you next time on City Inside Out.